Good morning, Latin 2 students. Thank you guys for coming today. We're going to start chapter 36 today. You should have already looked at my vocab video yesterday and got started on the chapter 36 vocabulary. Today I want to take you through the grammar of the chapter and make sure you guys are good to go. Remember, this is our last chapter of the year. We're going to take a quiz on it next week, and so this is kind of a big one to finish up. It also finishes up this entire comparative superlative topic we've been dealing with for quite a while now. So it's kind of the culmination of that. So what are we dealing with today? We're dealing with the comparison of adverbs, and we've only done adjectives so far. It's not too bad though. We have a new construction called the ablative degree of difference in this chapter that kind of goes along with comparatives, and I'll describe that. And also we have a couple types of clauses to make sure we know called temporal and causal clauses, which are not too hard to understand, but they are something for me to point out today. So as we go over this chapter, you can pause my video if you need to think about something or go back over it. If something doesn't make sense from the video, make sure to follow up with me in my office hours or something so I can explain it to you in more detail. But this will be the topic of our next quiz and our final quiz next week. Okay. Now, this first couple slides are going to be review, so you might need to look at it, maybe you know this perfectly, but we have made adverbs before, right? First and second declension adverbs, if you remember, you took a first and second declension adjective and you added an E to the base. We learned this in Latin 1. So altus goes to alte, latus goes to late. That's how you make the adverb, the suffix. Now, these are just positive adverbs. These are not comparative. This is just how you make a normal positive adverb for first and second declensions. We did third declensions earlier this year. So you add, if you remember, this review again, iter or ter to the base of a third declension adjective to make it into an adverb. So acer goes to acriter, meaning sharply or fiercely. However, audax would go to audacter, meaning boldly. Again, these are positive adverbs, not comparatives, but we have had some experience doing adverbs before. Okay. Now, the comparative adverb is going to be similar to a comparative adjective where it's showing degree, right? So she ran quickly, but she ran more quickly would be comparative, or rather quickly, or something like that. How do you make the comparative adjective in Latin? Well, it's not too bad. Let me show you. Get myself over here. So the comparative adverb is the same as the neuter singular of the comparative adjective. In other words, they have the same forms. Do you remember the neuter one we did the last few chapters? For example, altior, altius. Altius was the neuter. Well, luckily, that matches the form of the adverb exactly. So look what I mean here. The comparative adjective was masculine, feminine, clarior, neuter, clarius. The adverb is clarius. Now, they're different words, but they do look the same. That is how you remember it. In a sentence, how do you know whether it's the neuter adjective or the adverb, since they look identical? Well, you're going to tell by context. If it's an adjective, it's going to be modifying a noun. There will be a noun there in the same case. If it's an adverb, what is it modifying? It's modifying a verb. So if it's an adverb, it's going to be kind of near a verb and modifying that verb instead of a noun. So Claudius would also be the comparative adverb, meaning more famously. A couple others examples, fortis would go to fortior in the adjective, but in the adverb, comparative would be fortius, which means more bravely. Even irregular ones work like this. So remember last chapter we learned the very irregular comparatives. We had bonus, melior, melius, optimus, right? So the comparative of bonus, the comparative adverb, would be melius, melius. That would mean better. Now, we've learned a phrase of the day that had nothing but comparative adverbs in it before. Maybe some of you remember your phrases, can remember it. It was back in Latin 1. Well, it was the motto of the Olympics. Citius, Altius, Fortius. Just a little reminder, since it has comparative adverbs in it. The Olympic motto means faster, higher, stronger. Citius, Altius, Fortius. You see all the comparative adverb endings there. Okay. And a cool $50 with that on it. Now, what about superlatives? Because that's how you make comparative adverbs. Superlative adverbs, they're also not too hard. The superlative adverb is basically the superlative adjective, but you replace the ending with an E. So claudissimus goes to claudissime. That would be the superlative adverb very famously. Fortissimus goes to fortissime, most bravely or very bravely. And even irregular ones follow this rule. So bonus, melior, optimus, the adverbial form would be optime, okay? So the superlative adverb typically ends in E. Now here's kind of a review of those two things we just learned. If you wanted to compare an adverb in all 3 degrees, positive, comparative, superlative, you would say latte, latius, latissime. That's from latus, the adjective, right? So widely, more widely, very widely, right? We have some other examples here. A third declension, you can see fortiter is the adverb positive, fortius is the comparative, fortissime is a superlative. And here's some examples of irregular ones. Male, peus, we've seen that last chapter, and then pessime. Now remember, these are adverbs, so they're going to be modifying mostly verbs and sentences rather than adjectives, which modify nouns. Now, there are a couple adverbs in this chapter that don't have an adjective they come from. Most of them do. It'll be quick and then quickly. Those are kind of from the adjective. But there's a couple that are just adverbs and they don't have any adjective to correspond to. And those two were in your vocab yesterday, but just to kind of recap those, we have diu, and then the comparative is diutius for a longer time, and then diutissime for a very long time. There is no adjective form of diu. It just doesn't really make sense as an adjective, so there's nothing there. It's just you need to know the adverb by itself. We learned these both in Latin 1. Saepe means often, saepius more often, saepissime very often. So these are two that were in your vocab that you want to learn, since they are kind of new. Now, just to go through a couple little irregularities here and then a new construction. There's a few irregular adjectives that do not conform to the rule for forming adverbs. We know that there's always irregularities in a lot of in languages, including Latin. Some of them, instead of using the normal adverb ending, they use the accusative singular form as adverb, and I'll show you the examples of those. One example is the adjective facilis, which we know means easy. If you were following the rule, the adverb would be faciliter because it's third declension. But this one does not follow the rule. Rather, it just uses the accusative neuter for some reason. It's just an irregularity. We don't know exactly why. So facile would be the adverb of facilis, which means easy. Omnia facile fecit. He did everything or all things easily. This is a positive adverb, by the way. It's not one of the comparative or superlative we just dealt with. Another word that does this, uses the neuter accusative, would be primum, coming from primus. Again, if you followed the rules, this would be prime, but here it's primum is the adverbial form, which usually means first or for the first time. So primum edit cubum, first he ate food, deende. You remember that from yesterday? Then he drank water. Yeah, so this is another one, kind of a couple irregular adverbial forms you want to be aware of. They could pop up on the next quiz as well. Now, what about our new construction that's going to kind of go along with this chapter very closely? Ablative degree of difference. It's kind of a complicated sounding name, but it's not that complicated of a construction. Whenever you're talking about comparatives, it's one thing to compare two things. She is smarter than him, but then sometimes you want to show the degree to which something is more or less, right? So you might say that he is much nicer than her, or she is a little faster than her sister, something like that, where it shows difference. A lot bigger, a little bigger, it would be degree of difference, right? The key words you're going to see with this construction, the first one is, there it is, molto. So what's going on here? This is the adverbial form. How can you tell? It could also be the neuter adjective. Well, you can tell because there's no noun here for it to modify. So it wouldn't make sense for it to be an adjective. It is the adverb. So he fights more bravely because it's a comparative adverb, right? Now the molto tells us how much more bravely. He fights much more bravely. So if you see molto and it's next to a comparative adjective or adverb, it's probably this construction. It's probably meaning much more bravely, much bigger, much nicer, much more quickly, whatever the adjective or adverb would be. But if it's used with comparatives, that's what we're talking about. Another word to look out for here besides molto is paulo. Paulo is basically the opposite. It means a little. That's a new word from this chapter. We've never learned that before. So he came. Ante can mean before, but it could also mean like earlier. So this would be how much earlier? He came a little earlier. Or here I translated it, he came a little while ago. But again, it tells you the degree of difference. It could be much earlier. It could be a little earlier. That's telling you the degree. Ante here is used like an adverb. It's a shortened form of antea. Ante can obviously be a preposition as well, but it's not used like that here. Now, one other way you might see an abo degree of difference would be like this: multis post annis. Okay. So post can mean after or later sometimes. This tells you later by how much, because obviously later is very broad. It could be a bit later, it could be a day later, it could be 5 years later. Here it's post multis annis. How late? How much later? Later by many years, or you could say many years later, the Germans attacked Rome. Yeah. So that's one you might see with a degree of difference with a number of days or years or something before or after something. Molto and Paolo is a two very common words to see with the out degree of difference. Okay. Now that's the basics of that construction, but just one more detail here. That's the sentence you saw just a moment ago. Many years later, the Germans attacked Rome. I did just want to point out with this slide, it's not really anything brand new, but just a little grammatical detail is that this sentence we just dealt with a few years later shows degree of difference, right? Post multos annos is a little bit different. It's a preposition followed by the accusative. So this would mean after many years, okay? Those sound kind of similar. So in our heads, we think those just mean the same thing. They're not quite the same thing because post multos annos kind of shows the passage of time after many years, like basically have gone by, whereas multis post annis, you're just kind of saying, okay, in the future, many years later. So they just, the stress of them is a little bit different, even though they're similar. So this is a construction we'll work on this week and next week before the quiz, but you always see this construction with, usually with comparatives or sometimes post or ante like we saw here. Now, another little tidbit from this chapter that you're going to start seeing, and it's not too hard, but if you ever see the word quam right before a superlative, it could be a superlative adjective or adverb. It's going to translate to kind of a specific idiomatic translation of as blank as possible. So let me give you an example so it makes sense. Here we have plurimos, right, which means many, but here, or very many, quam is right in front of a superlative, which is this. So it's going to mean not just many, but as many as possible. He collected as many soldiers as possible. So it's just kind of a little bit different than the superlative. It's a little bit stronger. He gathered as many soldiers as possible. Another example of this one, fugerunt quam celerime. They fled, how? Quam celerime. Not just very quickly, but because that quam's there, they fled as quickly or as swiftly as possible. And again, that's the comparative, not comparative, superlative adverb. This is only with superlatives, quam with a superlative. Labarabunt quam diligentissime. Hopefully this is true of you. Labarabunt, they will work not just very diligently, but as diligently or as carefully as possible. So just look for quam. Quam means a lot of different things in Latin, but here it pretty much sticks out because it's with a superlative. There's also an idiom here, which is quam primum. If you translate this literally, quam primum would be like as first as possible. Sounds kind of odd, but no, it idiomatically means as soon as possible. So venite ad me quam primum, come to me as soon as possible. So that's an idiom you want to look out for that doesn't translate completely normally or how you would expect it to. Okay, so we'll see this, a small construction. And finally, just a little recap of temporal and causal clauses, what those are, what they translate to, and also what words introduce them. These clauses they have their own verb in them, but it's not the main verb of the sentence. That makes these dependent clauses. We've had other dependent clauses this year, like relative clauses, so that's nothing new, but a temporal clause specifically, you'd probably tell by its name, shows time, right? Temporal clauses show time. A couple words we've already learned that could introduce temporal clauses. One of them is ubi, of course, meaning when. So when this happened, and then you bring in the main part of the sentence after that. Another one that just came up in yesterday's chapter, ut, meaning as or when. So as I was walking along, etc., that could be a temporal clause that describes when. And then postquam, meaning after, is another example. We learned this recently. After something happened could be a temporal clause. And then we also have an idiom here, simul atque or simulac. These are, both the same word. Ac is a shortened form of atque. So as soon as, or it could mean at the same time as. And let me show you an example of that one with the temporal clause. Similatque Caesar de re audivit, dixit. As soon as Caesar heard about the matter, he spoke. So here's the dependent clause. As soon as, here's the main clause, he spoke. Coincidentally, the main clause here is much smaller than the dependent clause, but it's not always like that. So that's the translation. So temporal clause, it's setting up the timing of the sentence. When is the sentence happening? Now, another one here is the causal clause, which shows you the cause of the next part of the sentence. The most common word here to set up a causal clause is the word quod, which we've learned before, that means because. So it's not too out of the ordinary. Quod milites optime pugnaverant, right? Because the soldiers had fought very well, Caesar praised them. So this first part of the sentence, the causal clause, is what causes the main part of the sentence. That's why it's called a causal clause. Okay, so causal clauses show cause. It's not a big surprise, and then temporal clauses show time. They show when the sentence is happening. Now, just a little note here about primus, which we've learned, earlier this year. Excuse me, I didn't realize I had those those silly sounds in there. So a couple idioms. These are actually on your vocabulary yesterday, so these aren't brand new or surprises or anything like that. But to reiterate these, primo, if used as an ablative, can mean at first. That's kind of an ablative of time when. Prima estate can mean at the beginning of summer. Prima luce is an idiom that means at daybreak or at dawn, literally at first light, but can mean at dawn. And then finally, prima nocte can mean early in the night, not just first night, but it's idiomatic. It means early in the night. So a couple idioms to work on this chapter. Now I wanted to close with a few sententiae antiqui. These are sentences that are ancient sentences that have something from this chapter in them, and I like to kind of bring these in so you guys can get used to translating. I'm really looking forward to next year whenever I have you guys in Latin 3 and we can kind of translate real ancient works together. That kind of starts in Latin 3, so that'll be exciting for us. This one is an anonymous saying. It doesn't mean it's true. I'm just bringing it up because it has the word numquam, which is one of our vocab words. Numquam ex malo patre filius bonus. So never from a bad father is a good son, right? So just the idea that if you have a bad father, he's going to have a bad son. Again, doesn't mean it's true. It's just kind of a saying, like father, like son, we kind of say nowadays. Yeah. Notice how the verb of this sentence is missing. Sometimes that happens in Latin where the verb is kind of implied, especially the verb est or any form of sum is the most common verb to be implied, like it is here. Another one here that uses something from this chapter. This is from Livy, who was a Roman historian, one of his lines of his history. Maxime is a superlative adverb, and that's why I put it in here. It's maxime. So fortune for all human events, but especially, maxime means like most greatly, or especially in matters of war, is powerful. So fortune's powerful, but especially in war. I like that one from Livy. And one last one here. What's the word from this chapter? Saepius opinione quam re labораmus. Saepius, of course, is one of our words from this chapter. It's a comparative form of saepe. So it doesn't just mean often, but it means more often or rather often. So what's Seneca telling us here? Seneca says, more often we work or labor by opinion rather than re here kind of means fact or the actual situation. So yeah, kind of an interesting insight from Seneca. Sometimes they're talking about opinions rather than what's actually the fact of the situation. So here's how I stated it. Yeah. So I like doing the Sententiae Antiqui with you guys, and of course, next year in Latin 3, we would be reading some more authentic Latin authors and stuff, which will be very exciting. So this is a big chapter, chapter 36. It's going to be our final chapter, so I want you guys to finish the year very strong. Make sure to look over your notes today and go over it. Make sure you're learning your new vocabulary. And of course, for the rest of this week and a bit of next week, we're going to practice and review this chapter to make sure you guys have a better chance to understand it and get ready and prepare for the next quiz, okay? So thank you guys for following along with me today and paying such good attention. And I will be back tomorrow to do a little practice with you, okay? Valete.